And I want to welcome everyone to this Tobacco Endgame webinar for the Americas, hosted by the Pan American Health Organization, ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, and Corporate Accountability International, CAI. Simultaneous interpretation is available in English and Spanish, so please use the icon at the bottom of the screen to choose your language. And please, when you do that, note that if you mute the original language, you might lose which I understand sometimes might be interfering here in the original language, but you will lose if there's a switch of language, so you need to be careful of that. I will switch to Spanish. If you haven't done yet, you can switch your language using the globe, the interpretation sign is at the bottom of the screen, and pick the language that you want to listen the presentations in. Si tiene preguntas, las puede escribir en el cuadro en la parte inferior de la pantalla y las puede dirigir a un orador, un panelista específico o al grupo y pueden escribirlas en inglés o en español. If you have questions, you can write them in English or in Spanish, and use please the Q&A box at the bottom also of the screen. Bueno, voy a empezar a dar la bienvenida a los panelistas y a los presentadores. Tenemos prevista tener la participación de Han Viksberg, que es la asesora senior en la Autoridad de Salud danesa, que va a presentar sobre la experiencia del tabaco Endgame en Dinamarca y en el contexto nacional danés para el tabaquismo infantil, que incluye el concepto de Tobacco Free Generation para gente nacida a partir de 2010. No obstante, Dinamarca ha empezado un proceso de elecciones y por esta razón los miembros del gobierno no pueden participar en este tipo de debates porque se considera una forma de lobbying político. Y por esto al último minuto ha tenido que decir que no podía participar. Así que es una lástima, pero tenemos otros oradores, así que no habrá problema. Así que empezaré con el primer orador, es Chris Bostic, que es el director de políticas de Action on Smoking and Health, y va a hacer una introducción, una descripción general de dónde nos encontramos a nivel mundial e internacional con el tema de Tobacco Endgame. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Laurent. Let me just share a screen here. There we go. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's great to see so many old friends and some new people on the call. As Laurent said, I'm just going to go over some of the basics of what we mean by Endgame and a little bit about the progress that we've made so far. It's been an amazing few years, going from virtually no examples of Endgame in the world to it becoming a normal part of conversations in most tobacco control circles. So that's very good to see. So the first thing I want to do is try to define Endgame, but I'll probably fail. There are a lot of different interpretations of what Endgame means out there. And this first one on the slide was adopted by the California Department of Public Health for their Endgame strategy. And they say that it means moving beyond a focus on tobacco control and its assumptions that tobacco is here to stay and that regulating the time, place, and manner of its use is the objective, toward a focus on a future free from commercial tobacco. I think to summarize that, they want to look for an end to the tobacco epidemic, not merely a mitigation. And then the second one comes from a paper written by some folks at UCSF, this University of California at San Francisco. And they define it as initiatives designed to change, eliminate permanently the structural, political, and social dynamics that sustain the commercial tobacco epidemic in order to end it in a specific time. I think that's the key there. I know in my career of over 20 years now, most of the time we've had this vision of a world without death and disease from tobacco, but no one had put any sort of year to it. It was just going to be someday, and most of us felt that it would be long after we were gone. I think that's what Endgame does is give us the vision that this could be done in our lifetimes, and to me, it's about operationalizing our visions. Many of us work for public health groups and tobacco control groups, and I know ASH has a vision of a world free, not a world with less death and disease from tobacco. The last definition I just want to throw out there is the one that we have adopted at Project Sunset, which a campaign that ASH has been working on for about 4 years, and it's a much shorter one. It's to phase out the sale of commercial tobacco products. And that seems like a very narrow approach, but there are, as you'll see, there are a lot of policy pathways to get us there. So I just want to talk a bit about what this means when we talk about Endgame, and it's about shifting how we've been thinking about it. And for those of us who are involved in the negotiations for the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, you might remember, and you can go and look now, that it's mostly a demand side treaty, and it's also just almost the perfect recipe for tobacco control from the 20th century because of when it was negotiated, and it's done a huge amount of good. But at the time, the framers didn't really imagine that we would be, at this point in time anyway, ready to start looking for a world where the tobacco epidemic is over. And so there's just a few things that we've had to shift our thinking on. The first is that the focus is on the industry and not just tobacco users. In other words, supply, not demand, as it says on the right there. And that's a big shift. The FCTC only has 2 articles on supply. One is on sales by minors, and the other is illicit trade, both of which are important topics. But there's no other article in the FCTC that focuses on supply. There's also a broader focus on tobacco users as well as youth. And that means that for years we've focused on children, and for good reason. First of all, we don't want children to be addicted, but second, since most people that smoke start as children, if we can stop them from starting as children, they won't become adult smokers, and we'll solve the problem in the long run. And that has done a lot of good, but there are still millions of children who are becoming addicted to nicotine and becoming adults who use tobacco. And we have a duty to focus also on the adults who are already addicted. The way I like to think about this is that as society, as governments, we kind of failed these people by allowing the tobacco industry to prey upon them when they were children and become nicotine addicts. We owe it to them to help them get off of nicotine and lead a healthier and happier life. And that kind of relates to the other point here, that tobacco users should be seen as our clients, not our opponents. And I know in the United States for many years, it was a very dueling contest between smokers and non-smokers. And the people who smoke were considered to be the problem. And it was all about smoke-free air and protecting us from their bad habit. We need to start thinking of them as victims in the tobacco epidemic. And then finally, obviously, cessation then is an obligation. That's the only way we can help folks get off of nicotine as adults is to have robust cessation support available. So I'd just like to use this quote. When we started working on Endgame at ASH, we did so because we had adopted a human rights-based approach to tobacco control. And so I love this little story, and some of you have heard it before, and I'm sorry. In 2017, we learned from a colleague in Germany that the Danish Institute for Human Rights had entered into a contract with Philip Morris International. And the idea was that DIHR was going to examine the human rights of their supply chain. So basically from the leaf to the factory. And it was an attempt to whitewash their image, basically, because they had done some work to reduce child labor and things like that. And so we reached out to DIHR and informed them that they can't do this. They're a governmental organization in Denmark, and Denmark is a signatory to the FCTC, and therefore Article 5.3 precludes them from working with them in this manner. To our delight, they immediately broke the contract with PMI and sent the money back. And then we asked them if they could write something on their website, because most countries have an institute like this. And we wanted to get the word out that this was not kosher. And so they published this on their website. Tobacco is deeply harmful to human health, and there can be no doubt that the production and marketing of tobacco is irreconcilable with the human right to health. For the tobacco industry, the UNGPs, and those are the UN guiding principles, therefore require the cessation of the production and marketing of tobacco. So to summarize, the tobacco industry violates human rights just by doing its basic job every day, by marketing and selling its products. That led fairly immediately to the Cape Town Declaration on Human Rights in a Tobacco-Free World. This was adopted by the 2018 World Conference on Tobacco or Health, and it laid out the argument for Endgame via a human rights-based approach. And I think the key article for me is A1. We agree that the manufacture, marketing, and sale of tobacco are incompatible with the human right to health. And this was adopted unanimously by the conference. I think there were 3,000 people there and hundreds of tobacco control organizations. So just a bit, this gets a little wonky, so I apologize, but just a bit about the human rights argument and how it leads us to Endgame. This is called the Protect, Respect, and Remedy Framework, or also the RUGGI principles. And it's the three pillars upon which human rights are built, especially around corporations. The Protect pillar applies to governments. They not only have an obligation not to violate human rights, but to keep other people from violating their people's human rights. The respect applies to corporations. So in this case, the tobacco industry, they have a duty not to violate human rights. If they neglect that duty, if they don't respect human rights, it bounces back to the Protect pillar, and the government has to take action. They can't just throw up their hands and say, what can we do? And then the remedy is for people that have been harmed by human rights violations, the government must provide some effective remedy mechanism to make themselves at least as whole as possible. So what else does a human rights-based approach say about Endgame? And first, the governments have not just a right, but a duty to end the tobacco epidemic. And I think that's something that is very poorly understood in governments around the world. It also says that the tobacco industry is a human rights violator just by simply doing its job. Now, we've all heard the stories of the terrible things the tobacco industry does in the background that obviously violate human rights. But even if they don't do any of those things, just their business model leads to a human rights violation. It also says we need, like, as we said earlier, take a greater focus on industry and supply than users and demand. That we must aim to end the epidemic, not just mitigate it. And again, we can't ignore cessation. We have a duty to help people that we have failed in their childhood. This is not to say that the demand reduction policies are not still vital. They are. We are in the places where Endgame is being discussed or implemented, they are at the position prevalence-wise because they implemented demand policies. So we need to keep doing those things and pushing as hard as we can. Partially, this is not every jurisdiction is ready. You know, Beverly Hills, which was the first to ban tobacco product sales, had a 5% prevalence. So it wasn't a big jump for them to go. But if some place has 22% prevalence, they're probably not ready. They need to do some more work before they can get to that point. Many places lack the very basic features that are necessary for Endgame. And these include things like infrastructure to stop illicit trade, tobacco retail licensing, things that you must have in place before you're able to enforce an Endgame policy. And then like I said, the prevalence is still too high among certain groups and regions, even within countries. In the United States, for instance, the Native American population is impacted greater than the rest of the population. We need to do some work there for equity. And I can't actually see my last thing because of the thing. It's also important to make Endgame part of long-term planning. And a great example of this is the Spanish declaration by the Spanish Tobacco Control Coalition. They have about 22% prevalence in Spain. So they're one of those places that's not ready to jump immediately to Endgame. But they put together a 10-year plan with demand reductions included that would get them to that point where they could then do tobacco-free generation. And we encourage all governments to do that kind of planning. Oops. So my last slide here is a map of what the progress that we've seen around the world on Endgame. And when we started this, I guess 4.5 years ago, very few of these pins were here, only some of the yellow pins for Aspire. But let me just go over it really quickly. The red pins are policies that are already in place. There are 6 of them. There are 5 in the United States and then 1 Balanga City in the Philippines. The law in the Philippines, which is tobacco-free generation, is not in force at the moment because of a pending lawsuit. Brookline, Massachusetts in the United States is the only other place that has done tobacco-free generation. They also have a lawsuit, but they are not enjoined. So the law is actually in place, and there are now people there who are 22 years old who can't purchase tobacco. And then, of course, you know about Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach that have banned sales altogether. And then Bloomington, Minnesota, and Dolesville, New York, have put in place a scheme where they will never give new tobacco retail licenses, and they will never transfer the existing ones. So eventually there will be no more retailers in those places. The yellow pins are for the Aspire countries, and Laurent was talking about this earlier. the countries that have set very aggressive prevalence goals for over a certain period of years. And there's actually more probably here than these pins. Every few weeks, I discover another country that has it in their plan to get down to a very low prevalence. It's worth noting, though, that not every country that has done this has actually put a detailed plan in place for how to get there. So it's more aspirational. And then the TFG pins are places where TFG is being strongly considered. And the most strong right now are the Malaysia and New Zealand, both of whom have bills in their parliaments for tobacco-free generation. Although the bill in New Zealand goes further to reduce nicotine and reduce the number of retailers. And then the dark blue pins are other. Most of those are about tobacco product waste. They're campaigns to ban filters or something similar in order to save the environment, but also to make cigarettes less appealing. And then the pin in Panama is just a recognition that the next conference of the parties is going to be held in Panama. That's November of next year. And that for the first time ever, the Article 2.1 in the treaty is going to be on the agenda. And Article 2.1 is where we hang our Endgame hat. It's the article that calls on parties to the treaty to go further than the specific obligations in the treaty. And so therefore, it gives sort of a carte blanche to countries to do Endgame. So I will stop there. I'll be happy to join the panel later, and I'll hand it back to Laurent. Thank you.
Okay. Muchas gracias, Casey, por darnos esta visualización global de dónde estamos, cuál es el estatus de políticas de Endgame a través del mundo. Y como vemos un poco, recuerda un poco el tema, como teníamos los ambientes libres de humo al principio de los 2000, donde había unos pocos ejemplos, pero todavía no era algo, pero empieza, con algo tenemos que empezar. Y Chris mencionó la Nueva Zelanda, así que la presentación va a ser por vídeo de la profesora Janet Hoek de la Universidad de Otago en Nueva Zelanda, y es la codirectora de Aspire 2025, que es este grupo justamente que Chris mencionó antes. Y va a presentar el proyecto de ley y el movimiento de control del tabaco de Endgame en Nueva Zelanda. Nichelle, I believe you will get that. Okay, great. So, we'll move on vamos a pasar a la próxima presentación y volveremos a la Nueva Zelanda. Voy a introducir a la nueva oradora, la presentadora, que es Hanna Ollila, que es la especialista senior del Instituto Finlandés para la Salud y el Bienestar, y es la directora del Centro de Conocimiento sobre Vigilancia de Tabaco del Convenio Marco de Control del Tabaco de la OMS, y trabaja con el grupo de trabajo sobre el tabaco Endgame en la Unión Europea, en el contexto del plan cáncer. Y es un grupo de trabajo que se llama Joint Action Task Force 2 y nos va a hablar un poco de esto. Y también abordarán el contexto finlandés, en el cual tienen una meta muy ambiciosa del 2% por debajo del 2% de prevalencia. So Hanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will now share the screen. Just a few seconds. Okay, here it should be coming.
Perfect. You see it well.
Okay, and you can still hear me?
Yes, hear you very well. Thank you, Hanna.
Thank you very much. Okay, so good afternoon from Helsinki, Finland. It's very nice to be here to talk about our European project and also talk about a little bit about the Finnish approach to tobacco endgame as well. Some background for this work. As Laurent mentioned, in last year, European Commission published this Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, where for the first time this kind of tobacco-free generation goal was set for the whole Europe. It's actually not yet 2%, maybe that's something to be discussed later on, but this aims for less than 5% of the population using tobacco by 2040 in Europe. And this is quite ambitious goal for the region because tobacco use in Europe is still very, very prevalent. It's around 25% at the moment, so there's a long way to go. And the countries have very different situations in terms of their national tobacco control context, the types of products available on the markets, and also the resources for tobacco control. So it's very interesting topic and interesting goal to be set, and definitely is also a very ambitious and challenging one. But here in this joint action, we have a separate work package focusing on this topic on tobacco endgame. And through our work with the European partners, we hope to be able to provide some concrete tools that help then the countries to actually put forward actions in line with this goal. And at the same time, it's good to also mention here that we also want to support the implementation of the global strategy of the WHO FCTC, and also this previous roadmap that has been published for the European region through the work in this work package. We have altogether 21 different European organizations participating to this work package. They are mostly ministries of health, public health institutions or organizations or universities. And these 21 organizations come from 13 different EU member states, which are listed here on the screen. And then we also have Norway, which is an EEA, so European Economic Area country, and then Serbia in this group. And here, some of the countries are marked with blue color, and these are the countries that have tobacco endgame goals defined in slightly different ways in these countries. But in any case, they have some aspirations to go for the tobacco endgame. Some of these have been among the pioneers in Europe in terms of the tobacco endgame. Like I proudly say that Finland has been one of those, and then some more words about that in the later slides. And then we also have some very recent tobacco endgame goals, for instance, from Slovenia, which just was announced this year in their newest tobacco strategy. But then to give an overview of what we are actually doing in this work package, we have many different objectives and tasks. To start with the first one, we are identifying and assessing tobacco endgame strategies and forward-looking tobacco control policies for this region. And this is done through different ways. The first task is about mapping these. And the second task then deals with the inclusion of cessation support to these policies and strategies that we identify. The third task is about scientific evidence, synthesizing this, and also identifying needs for future research. And then the last task here is to assess the feasibility of the identified policies and strategies specifically for this region. Then we are also exploring different best practices in the different phases of tobacco endgame goals and strategies. This means in the development, implementation, and evaluation of these. And there we also look not only for the best practices, but also the different challenges and constraints that the countries in this region face in relation to tobacco endgame goals and strategies. And then the last one is about promoting these best practices and facilitating their development in Europe. And there, the tasks under this are to define and introduce the concepts of forward-looking tobacco control policies and tobacco endgame, especially to policymakers, and then disseminating and promoting these through different means. And how we approach these different tasks and objectives is summarized here. So we are synthesizing a lot of information from existing global tobacco control databases, for instance, the WHO FCTC implementation database and the WHO Empower databases as well. And this especially feeds into the current status assessment of the WHO FCTC measures, which then helps us to conduct the feasibility assessment for these more innovative measures. Then we are also doing a separate questionnaire that focuses on tobacco endgame strategies and goals, and also to individual measures. This is actually something where we are currently running the data collection, and we hope to get many responses from the European countries. This questionnaire has been distributed to all countries in the WHO European region, and we'll use the opportunity here if we have European colleagues also present. I do hope that we get many responses from your countries as well. Then we are also doing key stakeholder interviews where we look in more detail to the best practices and to the enablers and challenges in relation to tobacco endgame goals and strategies in some countries that are on different stages in adopting these goals or strategies. So we are interested in countries which have not any of these initiatives yet planned or proposed. And then in the other end, we are also interested in looking at the countries which have had these official goals and strategies for a longer time. And at last, we are also doing a literature review to assess the available scientific evidence related to the tobacco endgame measures. And there's also quite recent literature reviews also published on the topic, so we are of course utilizing those as well. What we have promised to deliver here is shown on this screen. So we are producing two reports. The first one is about tobacco endgame strategies for the European region. And this will be published as an open access report next year in March. Then the second report will focus on the research aspects, so recommendations for research on forward-looking tobacco control policies and tobacco endgame strategies. That will be published later next year. And then at last, we will also be building an EU tobacco endgame toolkit to disseminate these best practices in the development, implementation, and evaluation of these tobacco endgame goals and strategies. And this will utilize and showcase different case studies from countries in different phases or stages of developing and implementing and evaluating these goals and strategies. So we hope that it will be a very useful resource, not only for the European countries, but also in other regions as well. Then a few words about our Finnish approach to tobacco endgame. As said, we have actually been somewhat pioneers in this topic. Actually, in 2006, we had this National Tobacco Control Conference where we had a keynote speaker who was the chair of the Finnish Parliament and our former Prime Minister, Paavo Lipponen, speaking. His image is here. And he actually just asked as part of his speak that what is your ultimate goal? Why don't you aim at tobacco-free Finland by 2040? And of course, this got many people thinking, and it was really taken seriously. A couple of years after that, different stakeholders established a Tobacco-Free Finland network, which consists of NGOs, governmental institutions, health professionals, health network, municipalities, and researchers. So it's a very broad network of different professionals and different institutions. And it's kind of an organized partnership between the NGOs and the government as well. And this network has been really important. It coordinates actions, it communicates the benefits of tobacco endgame, and it also advocates for policy changes. And this network is coordinated by the Action on Smoking and Health of Finland. In the same year, we also got the first roadmap for tobacco endgame. This was published by a working group, and it laid out many different actions or proposed actions on how to move forward to meet this goal. And since then, new roadmaps have been published quite regularly, so 2014 and 2018. And now just this year, the latest ministerial working group has been tasked to develop new proposals. So as was mentioned in the first speech or the presentation, not all the countries that have the tobacco endgame goals necessarily have the strategies or have really lined up the different actions that are needed to meet the tobacco endgame goal. But in Finland, we have approached this so that we have had these regular working groups, which always propose a lot of actions for the next term, so to say. And then these are ready for the next governments to then consider for the tobacco legislation changes or any other tobacco control measures to be actually adopted and implemented. So this has been our approach to keeping this on the agenda and keeping this moving forward from year to year. But of course, we also have quite a long history with tobacco control, which has helped in developing these tobacco endgame goals and these working groups and this work. Already in 1976, we had the first Tobacco Act, and it was followed by the advertising ban. Then we have had also many developments in relation to the smoke-free areas starting from the 1990s. And we also had the tobacco retail sale licensing and start of regular tobacco tax increases from 2009. And then 2010, as part of this reform of the Tobacco Act, here was the time when this new objective, the tobacco endgame, was actually integrated to this legislation. And as far as I know, Finland is still the only country where this tobacco endgame goal is actually in the Tobacco Act, in the tobacco control legislation. But I'm happy to learn if there are also other countries with this. This was followed then also by point of sale display ban, and then a bigger revision took place in 2016, where Finland also implemented the European Union's Tobacco Products Directive, and through that we also got the pictorial health warnings and menthol ban, for instance. But we also made additional regulations, especially for electronic cigarettes, including the flavor ban, vaping bans in the same areas where smoking is banned, retail sale licensing for these products, and display ban, to mention a few. And also more smoking bans, for instance, in private cars, and then also the possibility to apply for municipal smoking ban for multi-housing units or apartment buildings. And here the tobacco endgame objective in the Act was also broadened. So the Finnish approach is to not cover only tobacco in tobacco endgame, but we include tobacco and non-medicinal nicotine products. And although this goal was already ambitious in 2010, when we aimed to reach less than 5% by 2040, in 2016 that was still changed, that we want to achieve it a little bit sooner. So this was also changed so that we aim to get to this less than 5% by 2030 already. And as the most recent steps this year in another revision of the Tobacco Act, we have also adopted plain packaging for tobacco and e-cigarettes, and that's coming from next year, being implemented then, and then also some new smoke-free areas, playgrounds and beaches especially. And just to also show you how it really reads in our Tobacco Act, in the first chapter where we have the general provisions, there's the objective of the Act, which states that the objective is to end the use of tobacco products and other nicotine-containing products that are toxic to humans and cause addiction. And then the second clause here says that to achieve the objective referred in this subsection 1, this Act lays down measures to prevent people from taking up the use of tobacco products and developing a nicotine addiction, to promote the cessation of the consumption of tobacco products and similar products, and to protect the population from exposure to smoke from such products. And having this objective in the Tobacco Act has been very important in order to also move forward some ambitious tobacco control measures as well. But as the last slide here, we also still have some way to go in terms of meeting this goal. We are doing quite well. We are having a quite steady decrease, but still it should be a little bit faster in order for us to meet this goal. And that's also one of the reasons why this new ministerial working group is also thinking about some new ways to make the trend decrease somewhat faster. So we are still over 10%, both for women and men, and we are waiting for the next prevalences that come next year to see how this then looks, and we of course hope it looks much better then. But for youth, we are already in a very good stage in terms of the daily smoking prevalence, so that's already at 5% or a little less than this in the youngest age groups. And of course, prevention is very important, so we are very happy to see these. But we of course still have our own challenges, and also the socioeconomic differences in tobacco use exist also in Finland, especially between the educational groups, and then we also have different vulnerable groups where the tobacco use is clearly more prevalent than in the general population. And then the provision of cessation support, both to general population and to vulnerable groups, is a specific challenge for us. We have not had enough resources for that. And then we also encounter challenges in relation to some more novel or emerging products as terms of the geographical location. Finland is a neighboring country to Sweden, and we share also border with them, where this smokeless tobacco, which is banned in all the other countries in EU except Sweden, exists. So using snus, we have also seen a little bit of spillover in using snus also in Finland, so that creates some challenges to us. And if we use the prevalence statistics where we not only look at daily smoking but also include tobacco or snus use, then the prevalence figures are still a little bit higher, especially for men. And then there are different novel products coming up. E-cigarettes have been strictly regulated in Finland, and the prevalence of their use has remained very low. It's been around 1% in the adult population. And after we introduced the comprehensive regulations, we have also decreased the use among youth. which is very good. But then this snus and also the snus-like nicotine products like nicotine pouches are clearly posing new challenges also here in Finland. So that's definitely something that we need to be careful about. But that was a brief overview of the work that we are now doing in this joint action together with our European partners, and then a few slides about the Finnish approach to tobacco endgame. I'm happy to answer any questions if you may have, and also there's my email address if you are interested in learning more of this project. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hanna, for presenting both the European work, the European Commission work, as well the Finnish work. And for a reminder, I guess also about the inequities issue. And we'll come back to, I have a few questions for you, and we'll come back to it. How can we use endgame strategies to actually address tobacco inequities issues? So now we'll go back to the presentation from New Zealand. So we'll have Nichelle see if we've managed to solve that technical issue and have the presentation. I think we're ready. What I suggest we're going to do then, maybe before I go into, maybe I will give Chris the floor for 2 minutes to maybe give an overview of New Zealand's plan. Maybe if you could do that in 2 minutes, and then we'll give the floor to Eduardo Bianco. Does that seem reasonable, Chris? Would that be okay? Do you mind giving a 2-minute overview of the New Zealand bill?
And also just to note that we do have Janet's presentation as a recording, so we'll be able to include it in the final recording that we share with everyone.
Great. So briefly, New Zealand has a very ambitious plan, and the bill is in Parliament, and it's expected to pass this year, hopefully in November. And there's 3 major elements to it, 3 major endgame elements. The first is a tobacco-free generation policy, or in New Zealand's case, it's a smoke-free generation policy because this law applies to combustible tobacco. And that will mean that anyone born 2009 or later can never be legally sold tobacco. It also includes a drastic reduction in the number of retailers. And there's a formula for how they're going to do it, but they estimate that it will get rid of 19 out of every 20 retailers, so a 95% reduction. And then the third element would be also a first in the world to reduce nicotine to non-addictive levels in combustible cigarettes. So the combination of these 3 things is going to be very powerful in further reducing prevalence in New Zealand. And just a note, one of the things I love about the New Zealand plan is that they were the first Aspire country. They were in 2010, they set their 2025 goal for 5%. And about 3 years ago, they realized, looking at the math, that they weren't going to make it with demand side reductions alone. They had already done everything possible under the FCTC, and demand was, prevalence was going down, but not fast enough. And so rather than change the goalposts, they decided to change their strategy, and they're still determined to get to that 5% by 2025. So it remains to be seen if this will work, but given the set of policies, I'm pretty hopeful that they will. That's about all I have for that, Laurent.
Muchas gracias, Chris, por darnos este.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Janet Hoek. I'm a co-director of the Aspire 2025 Research Centre at the University of Otago's Wellington campus in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to tell you a little about the endgame vision that we're implementing in New Zealand. Just some quick disclosures. I've never received any industry funding. I have served in several advisory roles, and I've received funding from independent research funders. By way of overview, I'd like to begin by giving you a brief history about the New Zealand endgame and the current proposals that are moving through our Parliament as I speak. I'd like to outline the core measures in our current legislation. These include denicotinisation, greatly reducing the availability of tobacco products, and introducing a smoke-free generation. I'd like to end by considering some of the industry arguments that have arisen and how we might manage those. So how did we get to where we are today? It's important to remember that Aotearoa was originally a tupika kore, or tobacco-free nation. Tobacco was introduced via colonisation, and it's since then imposed a disproportionate burden on Māori, the indigenous peoples of New Zealand. As you can see in this graph here, with daily smoking prevalence for Māori shown in red and for non-Māori shown in blue, there are very large differences in the smoking prevalence rate, and although these have diminished slightly over time, they give rise to persistent and enduring health inequities. Māori leaders were deeply cognizant of these inequities and were the first to propose and envisage a tobacco endgame. They led a parliamentary inquiry into the tobacco industry and its effect on Māori, and the report produced by this committee proposed the endgame goal. Since then, they've called consistently for increased action, and now we finally have an action plan. They're leading a steering group that's overseeing implementation of this plan. So in December 2021, only just 9 months ago, the New Zealand Ministry of Health released a Smoke-Free 2025 action plan. That's given rise to the bill going through Parliament and the 3 world-leading measures that it contains. So I've mentioned denicotinisation, greatly reducing the availability of tobacco products, seen here sold by the stores you can see in red, and introducing a smoke-free generation. Let's look at each of these measures. First, very low nicotine cigarettes. What do we know about these? Effectively, we know that they are tobacco companies' worst nightmare. Removing the nicotine from tobacco products might lead people to lose their dependence on smoking, see the customer base that they have carefully acquired dissipate, and see health returned to the population. There's very strong logical and theoretical support for introducing a denicotinisation policy. As I've explained, and as the industry foresaw many years ago, if tobacco was no longer addictive, people would have no craving to smoke, there would be no reward for smoking, and quitting would be much easier and uptake much less likely. We know a lot about denicotinisation from trials that have been undertaken where people have been given very low nicotine cigarettes, or VLNCs. People exposed to the VLNC treatment arm smoked less and were therefore exposed to fewer toxins. They were more likely to try and quit, and they were more likely to succeed in their quit attempts. And we know that these effects have been observed across different population groups, including vulnerable groups such as people who are experiencing anxiety diagnoses and depression. We also know the expected outcomes via modelling studies, and you can see here some preliminary modelling work that was undertaken in Aotearoa New Zealand. This graph shows expected smoking prevalence for Māori. So if you follow the blue line that you can see here, this would be business as usual smoking prevalence if there was no intervention. When we intervene with very low nicotine cigarettes, we can see different scenarios presented in each of the orange, yellow and grey lines. And what we can see for each of these is a very profound reduction in smoking prevalence. In fact, we can see that this measure is likely to bring about the Smoke-Free 2025 goal of reducing smoking prevalence to 5% or below among all population groups. Let's look next at retail outlet reductions, or reducing the availability of tobacco products. As I mentioned, tobacco products are available throughout Aotearoa. We currently have no licensing scheme, we don't even have a registration requirement, so we can only estimate the number of retailers, and they are believed to be somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000. We know that these outlets are concentrated in neighbourhoods experiencing much higher deprivation, and that this concentration helps to entrench smoking among population groups that are already dealing with multiple forms of disadvantage. The proposal in our bill is to reduce the number of tobacco outlets by around 95% to somewhere between 300 and 600 outlets. There's a very strong logical rationale for doing this. The widespread availability of tobacco is simply a historical anachronism, so the bill will address that. We also know from evidence that's been undertaken looking at studies of young people that there is strong evidence to show that reducing access, both the density and proximity of outlets, is associated with decreased youth smoking uptake. We know, as I've explained, that retailer density entrenches health inequities, so reducing this will help the many people who smoke and want to quit to be more likely to become smoke-free. Because we know that reducing temptation supports cessation and reduces the risk of relapse. There are challenges to this measure, not surprisingly, from small retailers and some of the groups that represent them. They're very concerned that the measure will reduce their financial viability, which of course is a powerful argument in our post-COVID era. This is a quote from one of the submissions that they've made. They argue this measure, reducing the availability of tobacco and taking it out of smaller retail stores, would rip the guts out of an important source of footfall and destroy the viability of many outlets. In fact, we know that that argument is not correct. The footfall argument has not been supported by studies undertaken in New Zealand, the UK and the US. And the reason for that is simple. Most purchases at convenience stores don't involve tobacco. Tobacco sales have been falling for a long period of time and are continuing to fall further. Only around 15% of transactions in a New Zealand study involved tobacco, and of these, 2/3 were only tobacco. So in other words, only 5% of all transactions included both tobacco and non-tobacco products. Tobacco is not an important source of footfall traffic. The final measure is the smoke-free generation. This explicitly acknowledges that there is never a safe age for tobacco use to commence, so it challenges perceptions of smoking as a rite of passage or a symbol of maturity which tobacco companies have carefully cultivated. It recognises that tobacco is intrinsically harmful and that young people in particular have a right to be protected from harmful products. We know again from modelling studies that the impact of the smoke-free generation will be profoundly pro-equity. You can see here the gap in smoking prevalence between Māori and non-Māori. After implementation of the smoke-free generation, modelling work estimates that that gap in prevalence will have reduced dramatically. Now, as you can see here, the smoke-free generation alone is not expected to get us to the 2025 goal. That's why the package of measures that are being presented in the New Zealand legislation are so important. They'll bring about rapid reductions in smoking and they'll ensure that those reductions are sustained. The industry, of course, has presented many challenges, and I'd like to turn now to addressing those. A very common challenge is that illicit trade will increase greatly. Government revenue will decline, gang power will increase, and an intrinsically harmful product will become even less safe. In New Zealand, we've responded to this by increasing monitoring and border surveillance, and of course other nicotine products remain available. The overall solution to a question of illicit trade is obvious. It's to decrease the attractiveness of the market by making it much smaller. Another argument that's typically levied against all of these measures is that they are attacks on freedom, and analogies with prohibition from the 1930s of alcohol in the US are often adduced. But people who smoke support reducing nicotine and the other measures. The vast majority of them want to quit, and the measures are not about prohibition because nicotine is going to be available from other sources. There are many claims that the smoke-free generation removes freedoms. Here you can see some quotes from British American tobacco and also from dairy owners who evoke the spectre of the fun police trying to interfere in young people's lives. An alternative view is that we need to think not so much about negative freedom, which is equated with non-interference, but about the importance of positive freedom, which recognises that we need to intervene, that we have to use our power and resources in order to create the conditions where young people truly can make free choices. So in other words, we have to communicate the paradox that sometimes regulation or constraint is a necessary prerequisite to freedom. When we've talked with young people, they see these arguments as illusory. Choice is not being removed because it never existed. As they say, if it's the government taking it or if you're addicted, you have no choice either way. They also believe that the smoke-free generation will bring future benefits that are truly profound. As one young person said, when they are the leaders of their generation, they've stopped smoking and the generations below them stop, it will just get better and better and better. There are important implications for us. We have real opportunities to own these freedom metaphors. They belong with us in public health and not with an industry that spent decades refining a product to ensure it's exquisitely addictive. We need to design communications that avoid these cue-based heuristics that depend on visions of negative freedom. And we have to present powerful pictures that focus on well-being and future equity. There are important implications and responsibilities that fall to us too. We must challenge industry discourse. If tobacco companies claim they want to unsmoke the world, then that means they support these policies. If they want to argue that people who smoke have a right to autonomy, we need to make it clear that equates to a freedom from addiction. There are important opportunities to hold this industry to account, and we must take them. Because we have an opportunity to deliver a profound vision of future health that will benefit generations of young people. It's the vision that inspires my colleagues and me to continue working in this area in Aotearoa New Zealand. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Muchas gracias, Chris, por darnos este resumen. Realmente siento que...
Thank you very much. For the summary, I really apologize, and I am sorry for the problem we had with the soundtrack. We are going to move on to the last speaker, and then we're going to move on to the discussion panel. Dr. Eduardo Bianco will be the next speaker. He directed the framework agreement, the framework convention here in the Americas, and he will put it in the context of the Americas and how this fits according to the challenges and the situation in Latin America. Eduardo, please go ahead. Thank you very much. Laurent, I am trying to solve the issue with the presentation. It is a pleasure to be here in this webinar on such an important issue. And I will share my own personal point of view regarding the possibility of applying in-game strategies or whatever in Latin America, and also to discuss what could facilitate this implementation and mainly what would be the obstacles to the application of in-game policies in our region. To that end, I will review the over 20 years of tobacco control in our region. In 1999, a person that is very dear to us, Dr. Eduardo Peruga, at a World Congress in Canarias, said this phrase that was reflected in the newspaper at that point in time. Latin America is far from implementing effective tobacco control policies. And it was true. Latin America There was high prevalence in Latin America, no policy as we know it now that had been implemented, and in early 2000s it was difficult to think that this would change in a short time, but with the support of the WHO tobacco control framework, Latin America within 10 years became one of the regions with the most significant progress made for the implementation of the framework convention. But the progress has not been even. But the region of the Americas would be the only one that would reach a reduction of 30% in tobacco consumption, which is one of the goals for non-communicable diseases by 2025. As part of this process, some countries were pioneers and they spearheaded the change and created a domino effect to justify the progress that I mentioned at the outset. As an example, and there are others, we have Brazil that in 2001 cleared the path with the first graphic health warnings in the Americas and second to the rest of the world. In 2006, Uruguay was the first country in the Americas and the fourth worldwide to apply tobacco-free environment, indoor environment, and in 2016, 16 out of 20 countries of the Americas had graphic health warnings and 18 had approved tobacco-free indoor areas, and by 2020 all of South America is free from tobacco smoke. This shows that it is important to include all of the warnings, that the domino effect does work in the region, and that this could be a strategy for this topic that we are addressing at this point in time. I should also underscore that Latin America was not just a pioneer in the implementation of the framework agreement or one of the countries that applied the framework agreement faster, but there were innovations in the region, and also as an example, only as an example, let me mention some. For example, Uruguay in 2008 established the only just one variant per brand, that is to say, just one type of Marlboro, Camel. It was impossible to have different types within the same brand. In 2009, they established an 80% health warning, and that was the country that had the largest graphic health warning at that point in time, and all of this went together with an impact on the consumption of tobacco. And next, I should mention Brazil. And as you had mentioned, it was the second country in the world to apply graphic health warnings, but also became the first country in the world to approve a wholesome prohibition on all tobacco products. But this implementation has been delayed due to some legal challenges. The third country that I would like to include here is Panama, which was the first country in the world to apply a total ban on ads complying with the commitment under the framework convention. So under the influence of the framework, Latin America was able to obtain an impact on tobacco consumption. We already highlighted Panama, that attained 5% prevalence, which places it within one of the endgame goals, that is the 5% prevalence or lower. And it also underscores that they were not only pioneers in implementation, they were not only innovators, but they were also able to resist the first attack by a tobacco company against the implementation of the framework convention and innovative measures such as the Philip Morris case versus Uruguay, and we were able to prevail in that case.
Okay, so narrowing it down to understand what our strengths and weaknesses are, how we're able to make progress in the region. First of all, the influence of the process of the Framework Convention and the successful international efforts that gave us or guidance. For example, the health warnings of Canada and Ireland as smoke-free countries were motivational to us in our progress. Secondly, we had the national presence of strong leaders, both from the civil society and government, who had clarity of vision and the skills and good international contacts that allowed them to mobilize whatever they needed to mobilize then. And the other aspect that also contributed was building alliances or partnerships for tobacco control, where the civil society had significant participation. And I want to emphasize and stress as another main factor was the international support that was given to the region of the Americas and to Latin America in particular in this process. And it was strong. If we had not been supported and guided by international actors, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we have. And finally, and I need to be clear here, progress happened because there were national political junctures that were well used by local activists in order to advance in implementation of the FCTC. What is very clear to me is that Latin America advanced with momentum, taking advantage of different points in time, and not for actions that were aimed at getting to a certain prevalence of smoking by a certain time. So all these experiences that I have mentioned, all these positive experiences, could be used as the basis for the implementation of the endgame strategy in Latin America. And this is a question. And it can be answered yes, because the region showed it had key elements to be able to make progress in these policies. First of all, political smarts and good leadership and ability to overcome obstacles. But there's a but. And it is that we have learned our lessons, but not only us, but the tobacco industry knows how we work now, and they will always try to block us. So implementing Article 5.3 at national level is a critical element if we want to substantially advance in the region. Another aspect which we have to improve is that many countries continue to be institutionally weak vis-a-vis mechanisms of coordination for tobacco control and sustainability of tobacco control. It's not enough to implement sound policies. We also need to develop the capacity to, or the ability to maintain them and finance them appropriately. If we had this in the region, it would be easier to implement endgame policies in many countries within a short period of time. And what I just said leads me to another point, which is identifying obstacles to endgame. For this, we need to go over those things where we have failed in implementing the framework convention. First of all, we have failed in everything that goes beyond ministries of health. With very few exceptions, the great successes we've had are from policies that are under the health ministries, but most endgame strategies are not included in this category. And therefore, we should bear this in mind. And as I said before, implementing Article the aforementioned article to develop a system of tobacco control that most countries in the region don't have this yet. And the presence of a national coordination mechanism would allow for sustainability from the technical and political standpoint, with participation of civil society going beyond an administration, a government administration. So these weaknesses could be a big obstacle for achieving the end game. So how could we implement a strategy of endgame, tobacco endgame in our region? The steps I would suggest to promote endgame strategies in our region. So this would be first to increase regional awareness of what an end game would look like. And this is what we're doing here today. Why should we implement it? To share examples of best practices that are being used in other parts of the world. And this objective is what has joined us in this effort. I would then identify a country or a state or some national entity in a country which would have the following characteristics. First, prioritizing social policies. Second, having strong, motivated leaders, both at government level and in civil society. Thirdly, that they have made significant advances in public health or in tobacco control measures. And so these would be the things that would lead to fertile ground, that would mean we had fertile ground to establish endgame in Latin America. And that country or that state that would like to make progress in this strategy would receive from the international community enough support to be able to establish, sustain, and defend this endgame strategies and policies, and be able to withstand the attacks from the tobacco industry. And finally, to this point, we have been defending ourselves from constant attacks from the tobacco industry, and we have been reacting to their new strategies and their new products. So the time has come to go to attack ourselves and begin to implement our strategies, which should be proactive and aggressive to be able to come to an end game for tobacco. I think using end game strategies in Latin America is a possibility, but we need both the vision and political audacity. So we need to identify those countries or states which would be more appropriate or the best pioneers, and then have them set the example, and then this should generate a domino effect in the region. So these are my comments, and I hope I have contributed to your understanding of where we stand in our region. Thank you, Eduardo. During the panel discussion, we will have more opportunity to hear your words. And it is important to remember what you have reminded us of, the support from others, from the international community. And the first slide that you showed was back from 99. I remember those first workshops where it seemed almost impossible that a country in Latin America be smoke-free. Only Uruguay back then in 2000, 2002. And then what was impossible happened, where we have champions and we have the elements you mentioned that have contributed to this. Well, apparently the video is here, so Megan.
Te resumen, realmente siento que hayamos tenido este problema con el sonido.
I'm going to introduce the two more panelists, Dr. Reina Roa from the Health Ministry of Panama, and then Pasilar Gomez, who is a tobacco specialist. So now we will have all the panelists and speakers. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me all right? Okay. All right. Thank you. The first question is for the two new panelists who have just joined our group. I'm going to begin with Dr. Reina Roa. Since Panama is approaching a 5% prevalence, well, so how do you see the endgame strategy for Panama? We will have the COP10 at the end of the year in Panama. So how do you see the situation for Panama and Latin America? Thank you very much. I'd like to say that we started to look at the endgame since 2013 after a meeting we had in India. We were struck by this and we wanted to start exploring the 5%. At that time, Panama had 6.4 prevalence. And so we got together and tried to set the goal for 5%. So COP made a decision where they encouraged the States Party to decrease by 30% their prevalence by 2025. And with our calculations, we thought, well, we need to reach 4.8. And today, 2022, we are at 5%. I have to say that it is the national average, but we have certain areas in the country where there are differences in the percentage, which basically are the indigenous areas of the Panamanian population, and we're working directly with them, with the authorities of those counties, mostly indigenous, so that better control policies can be implemented there. And from the beginning of the implementation of the Framework Convention, we focused on the fact that smokers are the first victims of the tobacco industry. They are not. So they are the victims, and they are the people we need to focus on to help them stop smoking. So cessation clinics are a priority in Panama. And with the money from tobacco taxes that have been given to the health ministry, so we use that to fund cessation clinics. And we have been able to have this dynamic in our whole territory where we have 56 active clinics. It is clear for us that to prevent people from starting smoking is essential. And we work with youngers, but if we work with young people, of course, but if we don't approach those adults who are addicted, then we are not accomplishing everything. So we work on both ends. Tobacco control is part of the health policy in Panama, which has had continuity through the different administrations over the past 20 years. And on the other hand, we, since 2019, took note clearly of the provisions of Article 5.2, where it's not only tobacco prevalence, but also nicotine prevalence. So since 2009, we made a ban of marketing of e-cigarettes. In 2017, we banned marketing of heat not burn tobacco products, and we did all of this. People could, for example, bring tobacco products and might want to use them in the country, so we had other policies to deal with that. All these provisions that were implemented became a law, an act of government which bans marketing of these products. In addition, the effort has been extraordinary on the local levels. We work with a national council for tobacco-free council, and we're trying to sensitize other sectors of the Panamanian government so that they join our efforts in tobacco control. So this is where I'll stop. And there, if you have other questions, maybe I can elaborate. I don't want to monopolize here. We have time, but I have a question for you, Adriana. A follow-up question, and it is regarding inequities. You say that prevalence has been higher in indigenous populations. So my question is, for example, the TLG strategies are solutions to deal with indigenous problems. For example, in Australia, the Aboriginal populations in the north of the country still have high prevalences. So what is your opinion? How to deal with this? Well, yes, prevalence in Panama in these indigenous populations, the highest one is around 9.2%, according to the measurement in 2018, and it was much higher in 2013. And so we decided to work on education and including surveillance in terms of sales of products. We have a county, which is the Onayaga. It's some islands in the border with Colombia, and they do a lot of barter. So they barter all kinds of good for cigarettes. We cannot call it contraband because it's a different dynamics. It's for all products that they do this. So we gradually have created awareness. And in fact, the Indigenous Congress, which is the authority over these populations, that Indigenous Congress has started working with us so that they can also implement some standards which come from their own Congress. There is one or two islands where they have established a ban, a total ban for tobacco products. They have banned not only tobacco products, but tobacco leaves that were used in traditional activities. And so gradually we've been working with this and with the Indigenous Congress. And so it has decreased gradually, but it is a priority. We also provide financial resources to health groups so that they constantly do training courses and educate both the younger people and the older people. And regarding measurement, while we do a general measurement of the whole country, we do also measures by district for adult population. And in the World Survey for the Youth, we have diversified it. We had a national one, and we had it broken down for the Gomayala indigenous group. And for the next one, we have the national one, and then four other broken down surveys for the 4 counties where we have the highest amount of smoking. So this allows us to understand and to explain why, even though we have an average in the country which is lower, we have certain areas, certain pockets that are higher. So this is why we are working with specific control measures for these areas. Irina, thank you. Adriana, as someone who's responsible for tobacco control for the region from PAHO, how do you see things? What countries do you think would be now ready or available for Endgame? So how do you see this for Latin America? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for this webinar. I think it is very important to bring this topic to the region. Doubtlessly, as has been already mentioned, and we include the Caribbean also, the region of the Americas has certain particularities in our region, and we need to understand this. We have situations where there is great progress in implementation of the Framework Convention over the years, as Eduardo presented regarding Latin America and especially South America. However, we still have some sub-regions that have not yet made enough progress in the Framework Convention. So talking about Endgame in the region also needs to take this approach because it needs to be understood that champions in the region that we have, where they are great at implementing the measures, etc. We have Brazil, a great example, Panama, we have Uruguay. And in these countries, we see that there is a great reduction in prevalence, and within that context, even though some of these countries have a higher prevalence, especially in the southern cone, then in order to be able to have endgame goals for prevalence reduction, then we would have time to achieve this. And so even though they have made progress, they need to do more in terms of other actions to implement. However, countries where initially we have lower prevalences, for example, in the Caribbean and Central America, even there is differentiated tobacco consuming patterns. So we have a whole heterogeneity in these scenarios, but the main being the implementation of measures that have already been established, the measures to reduce demand and others. So we need to accelerate these measures in their implementation so that then we can begin to work with more advanced strategies so that we can reach the end game. So I understand that there are different contexts. So the main issue right now is to continue to work, to continue to make progress, because sometimes even the countries that have had the greatest progress, we know that the industry is also getting stronger. So so we need to make progress, we need to accelerate measures that are being implemented, but also protection, maintaining advances vis-a-vis the tobacco industry. I don't want to speak of specific countries, but we need to identify and consider that within the region we have different scenarios, different contexts to consider before we can achieve endgame. Yeah, of course, I understand it. It's not a homogeneous area by any means. yes, we have countries with very low prevalences, like Panama or others. And of course, there are many differences. But yes, there are opportunities, however. Now I'm going to switch to English.
Hanna, before I've got and I have a question for Hanna. Before I've got a few questions from the audience, and if you have come to me privately, I'm going to quickly for you, Hanna. Hanna, you mentioned then the various toolkits, the various reports that will be released, and you mentioned a toolkit also on best practices. And so I'm curious about whether that one will be, when will that toolkit be ready, and if it will be ready next year and ahead of COP. That would be an important document to have from the European Union. And my second question to you also is in the context of the Joint Action Task Force, given that you're dealing with 21 countries, 13 represented in the working group, did the concept ever come up of this is prohibition, it cannot be done? And if that came up, how was that handled? How would that argument addressed within that Joint Action Task Force?
Thanks for very good questions. Well, the first one is quicker to answer. So the reports that we are delivering, the first one, which is just about the different tobacco endgame strategies feasible for the European countries. So that will be in March next year. So that is definitely there before COP. And as said, it will be an open access report, so it should be available for different stakeholders in the different countries. But then about this best practice toolkit, that is likely that it will be only in the last year of the project, so that's 2024. So that won't probably be there yet before COP, but I hope that our report will already provide a lot of different new policies that are being adopted or are being planned in the European region. Because at the moment, when we are just doing the data collection with our questionnaire, we are also asking about any planned policies in relation to tobacco endgame. So from there, we also hope to get more information of these, and then to be able to share this information also within Europe, and then to also countries in other regions as well. So that's for the reports. Then of this, I'm not sure if I got the question correct. Just correct if I understood something wrong, but about the prohibition of use.
Often it's framed as this is prohibition. You cannot do that. It won't work. Prohibition does not work. So how did you address that challenge within the Joint Action Task Force in the European?
Okay. Yeah, so I think we are in a good position in this way, that the partners that we have in this joint action are very interested in the topic. So we haven't had this discussion of that the countries or partners would be somehow against going for the tobacco endgame. But of course, this is only a small number of countries in the European region. So of course, we also have countries which are not in this project, not in this joint action. And there we might expect to have some differing views also on the whole tobacco endgame approach. And that's of course a challenge also in order to get our messages through and help to facilitate different countries in the European region as well. As I mentioned, there are we in Europe have most of the countries that have had quite high prevalence of tobacco use. Some are doing very well in terms of decreasing the use, but some not so well. So a lot of variation between countries, and then also within the countries, also in terms of the products that are being marketed by the industry and the industry presence and influence as well. So there are many challenges also in terms of getting the message through to policymakers. But I think that in this perspective, especially having this common goal that came from this cancer plan, this has been very, very important for the region, because now it is something that we can set as a minimum level. And even that, it's not a smoke-free Europe goal or smoke-free generation goal, but it's a tobacco-free generation. So I think that already sets sort of a minimum level that the countries should achieve or should aim for in Europe. Then, of course, there are countries that want to achieve more or want to also include nicotine, like Finland. But I think a minimum level comes then quite naturally from this common EU cancer plan goal.
Yeah, thank you for that. The next question, I will address it to you, Chris Bostic. And I want you to, two things. I want you to also address the issue of prohibition that we hear so much. Sometimes you hear, oh, this is prohibition. So if you could address for the second. And the other thing I want you to address, Chris, is the concept of, is a low prevalence necessary to achieve endgame? We know that a few countries like Malaysia, for example, is moving forward with an endgame policy and tobacco-free generation for people born after 2009, despite having a prevalence of, I believe it's close to 20%, suggesting that it would be probably easier for countries with low prevalence. It may not be absolutely necessary. So Chris, the floor is yours if you could answer those questions.
Sure, thank you. And I'll talk about the prohibition question first. And this is something I think that is a bigger deal in the United States than perhaps elsewhere because of our history of prohibiting the sale of alcohol and also the use and possession of alcohol a century ago. And it was branded just prohibition. It wasn't branded alcohol prohibition. So and it was a failure, a drastic failure. And so that's the first thing we get from opponents in the United States is this is prohibition and prohibition doesn't work. But I imagine that the word doesn't have the same negative connotation in a lot of other countries, although there may be words in certain languages that have a similar connotation. It's going to be, up to each campaign to figure out the rhetoric around it. But our major answer for folks who do claim this is prohibition is that it's not, because it's all about the sales. It's not about possession, use, or purchase. And we do fight those laws wherever we find them. And it's surprising how many local jurisdictions do have rules against purchase and use and possession. Even in California, which is one of the most advanced states in Endgame, they have to go and find all the cities and counties that have those sorts of laws and see what they can do about getting them off the books. On the question on the necessity of a low prevalence, the point is very well made, and I probably spoke too simply earlier during my talk about some countries being ready and others not. Since there are so many policy paths available to countries to move to endgame, some of them would work, I think, just fine in countries with high prevalence. And I'm thinking specifically about the tobacco-free generation concept, and also the idea of phasing out tobacco retail licenses over time. And we've done some polling in the United States and a couple of countries in Europe, and have found that a huge percentage of the population, even a majority of people who smoke, are in favor of tobacco-free generation because they wish they hadn't started and they're desperate that their kids don't, and nothing's being taken away from them. I would say that it's even more imperative if you have a high prevalence and are going to enact an endgame policy alongside other policies, that you have robust cessation support in place. Because I think that even taking away, even TFG that takes away the sale of tobacco to certain people of a certain age is going to motivate the rest of the population that's older to quit, and there'll be more demand for those services. And I think it's only right that we have those services in place. I hope that answers the questions, Laurent.
Thanks. And you bring up an interesting point also, is the support through the polling. Some of the polls that I'm aware of is in Ireland also, like it was over 70% support for endgame policies. In France was like 86% supporting a tobacco-free generation. 73% of French supporting 73% tobacco. 86% of the French were actually in support of tobacco-free generation by 2030. And the very specific TFG policy for people born after 2010. So the support is there according to the polls.
And this is a question directed to Adriana Blanco, Adriana Barcelar, and Reina. and Eduardo Bianco. In the context of Latin America, for example, Brazil, Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, based on the person asking the question, we have countries that are deeply affected by the illicit trade in cigarettes. And the person is asking, how are we going to manage those endgame strategies, in particular for future generations and the black market? Reina, Eduardo, and Adriana, do you have an answer to this within the context of Latin America and the risk of illicit trade, which is usually seen in any policy for tobacco control? What is your opinion? The risk of illicit or illegal trade, in my opinion, exists in any topic related to tobacco because the industry is part of illegal trade. That is an inherent problem. But I think that here we need to underscore the application of the protocol to the elimination of illegal trade, and that is the strategy that was identified by the states parties as key in terms of actually combating this increase in access to tobacco products. The problem is that this leads to affordability and consumption. I think that we need to focus on the application of the measures under the convention. There are not many countries of the region that indeed have ratified the convention, the protocol, but out of the countries mentioned, several already have the ratification of the protocol, and we're working on that. Now, in the case of the other products, of the other tobacco products, and this is what has been banned in Panama, we have not had illegal or overwhelming illegal trade after these prohibitions. However, it is clear that the industry is pushing these products and they're trying to introduce them as a less harmful option that helps you stop smoking, but it generates addiction. And we do have a specific problem. And we have an important problem that will be addressed at COP 10, and it has to do with illegal trade of a transnational nature. Social networks become a way of challenge for for the implementation of the endgame, and social networks sometimes fight back. So I think that we need to apply the protocol. Eduardo, would you like to add any comments? Yes, I follow the same lines such as Reina, that is, the states met during 3 years, to address the most effective measures to combat illicit tobacco trade. And they reached an agreement that was the result of consensus. We know what we have to do. We know what works. So if there is concern because of illegal trade, we need to apply what has already been agreed as something useful. We cannot continue to listen to the tobacco company and their allies that everything we do for tobacco control increases illicit trade or illegal trade, that illegal trade is terrible. Illegal trade, yes, is a problem, but the prevalence of tobacco consumption continues to go down. Legal trade and illegal trade in our region are decreasing. And let me present an absurd situation. If we just heard what they have to say, prohibition increases, then because they also say that the increase of taxes also increases illegal trade. So we are going to diminish taxes on tobacco, we are not going to implement what we have to implement because we're afraid of contraband or smuggling. No, we have to combat that with the measures that have already been proven. I thank you, Eduardo. Adriana, would you like to add something? Reina, I see that you continue to have your hand raised. Adriana and then Reina. I agree with what Reina and Eduardo have stated, and I just wanted to mention this. As Reina has already mentioned, we have new state parties, and 30 state members are parties to the framework agreement, and then we also have members to the protocol. Paraguay is also party to it, and this is an important country considering all of the border issue with Brazil. And it is key that here the lack of progress that more countries are ratifying this protocol also leads us to think of the multi-sectorial component. We do need to address this from several sectors. This goes beyond the health sector, so it is key for the governments to work together on the multi-sectorial aspects, and it is important to have this strengthening so that we can address the ratification of the agreement and also the application of the measures. As we have indicated, they are key elements to work on illicit trade. So this has to do with the importance of the multi-sectorial mechanisms within the process. If I understand your answer clearly, you do not see illicit trade or illegal trade as an excuse. The tools are there. So it is not an obstacle. It is not an obstacle to endgame measures. Reina. I wanted to add that there is something that is quite intriguing. Illegal trade figures come from the industry. The industry tells you how much illegal trade there is. And if you look at the figures for Ecuador and Panama, what a coincidence, these figures are the same. But from Panama, we have measured a different situation. So we need to be very careful. If illegal trade would be the one prevailing in the country, prevalence would not go down and tax collection would not go up. So we need to look at all of the context. And in the case of Panama, where is illegal trade coming from? Because we're not tobacco producers. We do not manufacture tobacco products. So the surveillance of the supply chain, that is also the responsibility of the industry, is here. We need to promote it because they do need to carry out the due diligence. The products are lost from the moment they leave the manufacturing plant and until they get to the final marketing area. So what are you doing? We should ask, what are you doing to prevent that illicit trade, illegal trade? We should not allow the rhetoric by the industry to delay our actions against tobacco consumption. This is a question that I have seen in several fashions. I will read it in English.
Endgame, combustible endgame strategies that creating market opportunities for e-cigarettes and other forms of nicotine consumption. Así que aquí la pregunta es cómo abordamos el tema de los nuevos productos.
So the question is how we address the new products and whether it is a conflict, if it is just one product, whether it is combustible products only, or if we can put everything together as part of endgame strategies.
Primero, luego me gustaría tener también la opinión de otros.
But then I'd like to hear the opinion of other panelists. Chris, why don't you?
I'm sure the other panelists will have something to say. Thank you for this question. It is a profound issue, and of course, everyone here knows that the rift in the tobacco control community continues over e-cigarettes and other alternative nicotine delivery systems. From an endgame standpoint, I think it's how you deal with the range of certain ranges of products is going to depend on your local context, and it varies so wildly. In the United States, politically right now, it's impossible to talk about Endgame without including all non-NRT nicotine products, and that's just the way it is, and we're fully supportive of that. In other countries such as New Zealand, they've decided on a different path. They're going to start with combustibles, and they're still going to regulate e-cigarettes, and they're figuring that out now. They're researching and drafting a policy for how to more stringently regulate e-cigarettes, but they're not planning to embrace e-cigarettes as part of their end game. And I know they're getting attacked from both sides. There are folks attacking them for not including e-cigarettes in their end game law, and there are others attacking them for not including e-cigarettes in a positive way, embracing them to help people quit. In essence, though, we don't really know what will happen in a country that focuses on combustibles first, because no one's ever done it. So we'll have to see. I imagine that e-cigarette use will go up a bit, but it's also going to completely depend on some of the other factors, in particular marketing. If a country that has ratified the FCTC has fully banned marketing and sponsorship and advertising, it's going to be difficult for the e-cig companies to attract new users. And if there's robust cessation support in place that works for smokers and works for them within their cultural context, then I think most people who smoke will want to get off of nicotine entirely, as opposed to switching to e-cigarettes. I'll leave it at that, except to say that the mantra for us at ASH and Project Sunset, so this is just for us, is that we can't let this argument about e-cigarettes dampen our movement in saving lives. And in most countries, the deaths are coming predominantly from cigarettes. That's not true in every country, but in the United States, for example, the CDC basically says that 100% of our deaths from tobacco are because of combustible cigarettes. And so we can't, I would not want to see laws held up for either reason. If they're going to include combustible cigarettes, we're going to support them. And of course, at the same time, we always need to be worried about e-cigarette use among children. And I'll leave it at that, and hopefully the rest of the panel will have something to add.
Yes, I'd like to hear from other panelists on this topic, given that Finland is including all nicotine products in its goal. Panama, the same thing. Panama has been very clear on this. Malaysia has included all products in its TFG bill. And the view of the health minister for Malaysia is that harm reduction is for smokers. So if we're going to include TFG, might as well have products, because since it's phasing out all tobacco products, so there's no need for harm reduction for people who are not going to be smokers as a consumer good. So those products should not be there as a consumer good. So Hanna, how has this been discussed in the context of within the European? Because within the European Union, also e-cigarettes are at this point, and it's something that's basically left to each member state. So in the context of the end game, how has discussion taken place within the European Commission?
Thanks. Yes, indeed. Also in Europe, there are quite different approaches to e-cigarettes. On the European level, we have the Tobacco Products Directive, which has partially harmonized the regulation of the e-cigarettes. So the minimum level of the regulations comes from there. So all the European countries or the EU member states have had to implement, for instance, health warnings and maximum nicotine content to e-cigarettes and so forth. But then this approach, let's say the harm reduction approach, that's been very different in the countries in Europe. As you said, Finland has a quite strict approach to also regulating nicotine products. But then, for instance, in the UK, especially in England, they have been very supportive for the use of e-cigarettes and also supporting switching from cigarettes to e-cigarettes as part of their national smoke-free goals and strategies. So there's definitely also variation in the policies, but it's an important topic to discuss. And we also had a very good workshop actually last year in November, where we also discussed what is needed for the different countries to meet these tobacco endgame goals and what to also avoid in tobacco endgame. And this topic of harm reduction and new products also came up there. And it was a very clear message that this distraction that comes from these industry arguments and from the continuous entrance of new products, we should really avoid that distraction in moving tobacco endgame goals and strategies forward. So even though there is variation between the country regulation and approaches, we shouldn't let it distract us from implementing effective measures and moving these tobacco endgame goals forward. And also to help us not get distracted ourselves in this joint action, we also developed our own framework for how we approach tobacco endgame, what we include there and what we do not include. And with our partners, we decided that we do not include harm reduction as part of the tobacco endgame strategies, but we also acknowledge that some countries which are already implementing quite strong tobacco control measures, are really advanced in the FCTC measures, may supplement their tobacco control with the harm reduction measures, but this should not be replacing effective measures and replacing this tobacco endgame movement. And I think that's a very important message.
So it sounds a little bit like very similar to what Chris said. We have to be careful not to allow the debates to fragment us, and also not allow the industry to continue co-opting the harm reduction debate, basically, like they've done with human rights debates and other debates that are legitimate topics, and then they co-opt the message and use it to fragment us. Eduardo. Eduardo, tú primero.
Gracias. Bueno, esta es una de mis preocupaciones.
Thank you. This is one of my concerns in connection with the endgame. How the tobacco industry will try to use electronic devices to benefit from the situation. We need to be extremely careful. And I'd like to remind you that in the confidential industry documents from late 90s, there was already a concern regarding the disappearance of the tobacco industry. They were expecting, or they were considering the possibility of the disappearance of the tobacco industry. I think it was in 2010, 2011, I do not recall the exact times. Siglo, that is a group of commercial analysts, analyzed all of the information and also all of the movement around tobacco control policies, and they established a scenario in which the industry could at the end of the day disappear if this went on the following decades, because there could be an abrupt, a tremendous drop in tobacco consumption. Towards 2010, and this is in boxing terms, we had them against the ropes. They were really concerned, and that was the beginning of the endgame as a policy. And by chance, over the same years, the issue of alternatives to tobacco gained traction. This is not something new, but they resorted to that because they felt between a rock and a hard place. And this was not to improve public health. It was just a new game that they started, and now we need to be very careful. And I give the floor now to Reina. Reina, thank you. We saw this approach, and we looked into electronic game electronic cigarettes as follows. First, evidence was not solid to show us that they helped smoking cessation, or that they were less harmful, or that they were less toxic for the human being. And we applied a key principle, that was the principle of being cautious in the area of health as part of the right to health, and also the approach to health and the obligation the ministry has to oversee this issue. But beyond this, something that was extremely important for our decision-making process is that this nice, colorful electronic means these modern cigarette devices are very attractive, so they're beautiful. It will be impossible to have kids, youth, quit smoking. They are attractive, they go along the new technological guidelines, and they are attractive to them. And I think that this was a properly made decision, and we live under constant attack by the industry. So this gives us the certainty that we are along the right path. And as we are running out of time, I just want to tell you that I look forward to see you at Coffee 10. You will have another opportunity to make some remarks. We're coming to an end today. I would like to give each panelist a session, a minute for them to share their opinions. And right now I have a very specific question for you within the context that you have already eliminated some of the products, whether you would consider this next step, that is to say within Panama, the other issue of the smokable cigarettes. Would you like to share some comments, and then we'll move to Chris, Hanna, Eduardo, and Adriana. Adriana will be the last one. Please go ahead. That discussion is still pending. We're trying to delay access to those products. We are focused on increasing taxes and also on focusing on this provision. I do believe that in the midterm, we have to make progress regarding this topic, and it is a possibility. It is necessary to look into this in detail. I know that progress has been made, and before I give the floor to Eduardo, in the European Union, we are in a process in which there is a popular initiative by our colleagues Raquel Fernandez Mejina and other nofumadores.org that have presented a proposal accepted by the European Union, and we are going to also work on collecting signatures. In early next year, we have 1 million signatures by different countries, and we need to consider this within the context of the European Union. Eduardo, very briefly, this is a commercial product that is defective and unique. It kills half of the consumers, of the users. If it was a different product, it would be banned already. It is promoted by an industry that has sold it knowingly. They knew that they were selling this product, and they are making it more and more addictive. And the ITC studies, that is to say the International Tobacco Control Policy Evaluation, has carried out studies, and they showed that if the states helped people to cease smoking, they could accept the ban on tobacco retail. We have all the reasons to make progress under the Endgame.
Many of the surveys that we currently have, they suggest a great deal of support, even by smokers, toward the Endgame strategies. The survey, which was not very formal, but it had many Spaniards, it suggests that no Spaniard wants their children to start smoking. So I think the population is now more prepared and accepts these kinds of policies better. many times more than the governments. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just very quickly, I know we're at time. I'll just say how excited I am to see all the interest in Endgame now. It's a profound change from even 5 years ago, and it's a great time to be in tobacco control. And it's actually getting hard to track all of the Endgame movements around the world, which is fantastic. And thank you to the other panelists.
Hanna, last words and recommendations for us. Hanna.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. I also really enjoyed hearing more of your presentations. Just to emphasize the importance of networking and this joint action, I think we use the joint action in this European project, but I think this is good to keep in mind also in other regions. So not only this cross-country collaboration, but I think this kind of cross-regional information exchange is very valuable. And I think we should make all the resources available that we have so that we can support as many countries as possible to move these goals and strategies forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanna. Adriana, las últimas palabras para el grupo.
What I would like to thank those who came to the webinar, who are attending. And yes, we need to keep the endgame on the horizon. Yes, we have differences in the countries, different scenarios regarding the tobacco control measures, but we need to think beyond these measures. And we are here. We are continuing to support the countries to make progress and to be able to truly end tobacco use in our region. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. Yes, if we are able to achieve these advances, which are part of the human rights goals, the United Nations Sustainable Goals. Yes, so thank you very much to everyone who has been here. I would like to thank the PAHO and corporate accountability.
Adriana, de la presidencia Reina por irse de
Thank you, Reina from Panama, Eduardo from Uruguay, Chris from Washington, D.C., and Adriana from PAHO.
On November 10th, we have another webinar at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 o'clock for Europe, 10 a.m. Eastern Time in Eastern America. And that will be about working across borders, collaboration between Polish and U.S. cessation experts. I did notice that there were a few questions on cessation. So if you're interested in that topic, and again, it's again another example of exchanging information and collaboration across regions. So in this case, that could be another interesting presentation. And we'll have Dr. Melissa Little from the Cancer Center, University of Virginia, and Dr. Paweł Koziorzak from Poland. Anyway, I encourage you to join us, follow us, and follow up the webinars we do, and keep in touch and continue joining the webinars. De nuevo, muchas gracias a todos y espero veros de nuevo en otro webinario. Muchas gracias por participar hoy. Adiós.